Hello again. Get comfortable. Settle into whatever position feels safest and warmest right now, and let your shoulders drop just a little away from your ears. Tonight, I want to tell you about a ship. Not a ship that sank in a single dramatic night with cannons or storms or anything so loud. This is a quieter story, a story about a ship that simply kept going, long after everyone expected it to stop. Let me tell you about the Baychimo. In the year 1914, in a shipyard in Sweden, workers built a sturdy steel cargo steamer, nearly 130 feet long, painted dark and practical, built for cold water and hard use. She was named the Baychimo, and a few years later she came into the service of the Hudson's Bay Company, one of the oldest trading companies in North America, and began making yearly voyages along the icy coastline of the Western Arctic. Every summer, when the ice loosened its grip on the northern seas, the Baychimo would sail up along the coast of Alaska and Canada, stopping at small trading posts, exchanging supplies for furs, carrying goods to places that had almost no other way to receive them. For more than 15 years, she made the same quiet journey, again and again, through some of the loneliest water on Earth. Then came October of 1931. The Baychimo was finishing her season, heading home with a cargo hold full of fur, when the Arctic did what the Arctic sometimes does without warning. The ice closed in early. Thick pack ice, moving with the wind and current, surrounded the ship near a small settlement on the coast and held her fast. She wasn't damaged. She wasn't sinking. She was simply stuck. The crew wasn't overly alarmed at first. This had happened to Arctic ships before. They set up a camp of small huts on the ice nearby, keeping close to the ship, waiting for a break in the weather that might let them free her, or at least let rescue planes land safely to bring the crew home before the deep cold of winter arrived. And then, on a night in late November, a true Arctic blizzard came through. The wind screamed for hours. Visibility dropped to nothing. The crew, huddled in their small shelters on the ice, could do nothing but wait it out, listening to the storm tear across the frozen sea in the dark. When the wind finally settled and the crew climbed out to check on their ship, she was gone. Just an empty stretch of ice and open water where the Baychimo had been anchored. The crew assumed the worst. They assumed she had been crushed by the shifting pack ice, or rolled and sunk somewhere out in the dark, swallowed quietly by the Arctic while no one was watching. They mourned her, in a way, filed their reports, prepared to go home and explain that the ship was lost. But a few days later, an Inuit seal hunter traveling across the ice spotted something in the distance. Something large and dark and unmistakably ship-shaped, sitting quietly on the water about 45 miles from where she'd vanished. It was the Baychimo, not sunk, not crushed. She had simply broken free during the storm and drifted off alone into the frozen dark, and then stopped again, as if she'd simply gone for a short walk and come back to rest. The crew traveled out to her, boarded her carefully, and found her still intact, still afloat, still, in her quiet steel way, waiting. They managed to remove some of the more valuable furs from her hold, but the Arctic winter was closing in fast now, true and deep, and the captain made the difficult call that the ship could not be safely sailed out before the ice sealed the coast completely. The Baychimo was left where she sat, abandoned but not sunk, empty but not gone. Everyone expected the ice to finish the job eventually. Ships weren't built to survive a full Arctic winter unattended, drifting free in pack ice, with no one aboard to watch for danger or pump water from a damaged hull. But the Baychimo, it seemed, had other plans. A few months later in the spring, another group of trappers spotted her again, still afloat, still drifting, slow and patient, somewhere along the icy coast. A few sailors even climbed aboard out of curiosity and reported that everything inside seemed strangely undisturbed, as if the ship were simply waiting for someone to come home. And then she drifted off again, and was seen again, and drifted off again. This became the pattern for years. Sailors, hunters, and coastal travelers along the far northern edge of Alaska and Canada would occasionally spot a dark, silent shape moving slowly through the ice far from any port, with no crew, no lights, no sound but the wind against her hull. Word spread. People began to give her a name of her own, separate from her original one. They called her the ghost ship of the Arctic. Over the following decades, she was sighted again and again in 1933, 1935, 1939, sometimes boarded briefly by curious sailors who found her hold still holding scraps of old cargo. Her decks worn but standing, her steel frame simply enduring. Some tried to tow her to port and claim her, but the ice always seemed to take her back before they could finish the job, pulling her free of the ropes and carrying her onward into the frozen distance, alone again. One of those encounters in the winter of 1939 was written down in more detail than the others. A small group of fur trappers traveling by dog sled along the coast spotted her dark shape sitting low against the ice at dusk. Curious and glad of any shelter from the wind, they walked out across the frozen sea to her hull, climbed the old boarding ladder, and let themselves in through a hatch that had long since stopped locking. Inside, they found the ship strangely, almost carefully, undisturbed. Furniture still stood where it had always stood. Old charts were still rolled and tucked into their shelves. Dishes sat stacked in a galley that hadn't seen a fire lit in years. Frost had crept over everything in a thin, silver layer, so that the whole ship glittered faintly in their lantern light, like a room dusted in a very fine, very patient kind of snow. They spent the night aboard, sheltered from the wind by walls that had crossed the same stretch of ice, alone for the better part of a decade. In the morning, they thanked her, in their own way, climbed back down onto the ice, and continued on their journey. By the time anyone came looking for the Baychimo again, months later, she had already drifted somewhere else entirely. There's something worth sitting with in that image. A ship with no crew, no destination, no one steering her at all, and still, somehow, she was useful. Still, for one cold night, she was shelter for a few tired travelers who needed somewhere warm and dry to close their eyes. She wasn't the only vessel like this either, if it helps to know that. Sailors have long told quieter stories of ships found drifting with no one aboard. Some lost to storms, some simply left behind by circumstance, still floating long after anyone expected them to. Most of those stories end in mystery, or tragedy, or both. The Baychimo story is a little different. Nothing sinister ever seemed to happen aboard her. No mystery needed solving. She simply kept floating, kept drifting, kept being exactly what she always was. Steel and rivets and quiet closed rooms. Long after the reason for her journey had been forgotten by everyone except the ice itself. There's something almost peaceful in that image, if you sit with it for a moment. A ship built by human hands for a very ordinary, practical purpose, hauling furs and supplies along a cold coastline, quietly outliving every plan anyone ever made for her. Not haunted, not cursed, nothing so dramatic, just steel and rivets and closed doors, drifting slowly through decades of Arctic ice, appearing here and there like a slow, patient dream that refused to end. The last confirmed sighting of the Baychimo was in 1969, nearly 38 years after that first blizzard took her. A group of explorers spotted her frozen into an ice floe off the coast of Alaska, still recognizably herself, worn by decades of wind and cold, but still whole. After that, she was simply never seen again. No wreck was ever found, no clear ending was ever written. Somewhere out in that vast, quiet stretch of Arctic water, the Baychimo either finally slipped beneath the ice at last, or perhaps she is still out there, in some sense folded into the pack ice, drifting so slowly and so far from any shipping lane that no one has crossed her path again. I like to think of her that way, if I'm honest. Not lost, not gone, just drifting, patient, unbothered by time, still making her quiet way through the dark and the cold, long after everyone who first knew her has gone to sleep themselves. There's a kind of comfort in a story like that, isn't there? The idea that something can be left alone in the dark, in the cold, in uncertainty, and simply endure, not through struggle, not through drama, just by continuing, quietly, one slow drift at a time, until whatever happens next happens on its own schedule, in its own time. You don't have to solve anything tonight. You don't have to reach any shore or finish any journey right now. You can just drift for a while. Let your breathing slow down, the way the wind eventually always slows after a storm, and let the rest of the night carry you gently wherever it needs to take you. Good night.